The cul-de-sacs of Willow Ridge looked like every other upscale American suburb on the surface. Perfectly trimmed lawns. Identical beige houses with American flags waving like they were in a catalog. And kids riding bikes under the watchful eye of speed bumps that cost more than most people's first cars. But underneath that postcard perfection sat the real ruler of the kingdom, the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association. And its queen was Karen Voss. She wasn't the cartoon version with the bob haircut and the minivan full of rage. Karen Voss had upgraded. Platinum highlights. A wardrobe of pastel blazers that screamed, "I volunteer for everything." And a smile so practiced it could disarm a HOA violation notice in under 3 seconds. She'd been president for 6 years. And in that time, she turned the monthly board meetings into her personal TED Talk on community standards. No flag over 4 feet. No lawn taller than 2.5 inches. Measured with the official HOA tape measure she kept in her purse like a weapon. No political signs after Labor Day. No fun. Basically, Elliot Hayes had lived on Maple Lane for 12 years. He kept his grass at exactly 2 inches. His mailbox, painted the exact shade of driftwood beige, approved in 2019. And his mouth shut. Most people thought he was the quiet accountant type, polite nods at block parties, never late on dues. What they didn't know was that 3 years ago the board had elected him treasurer because nobody else wanted the job that involved staring at spreadsheets instead of yelling at neighbors about holiday lights. Elliot didn't mind. Numbers didn't lie. And in a place where the rules changed depending on who Karen liked that week, numbers were the only honest thing left. The first crack in the perfect facade happened on a humid Tuesday night in the community center that smelled like old coffee and desperation. Karen stood at the head of a long folding table wearing her visionary leader smile. Behind her, a projector screen glowed with a slick presentation titled Furnick Community Ventures. The future is now. Friends, she began, voice dripping with honey and hidden venom. We've all talked about how Willow Ridge needs to evolve. Security that actually works. Smart gates that know who belongs. AI cameras that can distinguish between a delivery driver and a suspicious teenager. Furnick Community Ventures is offering us the complete package for just $250,000. It's a strategic partnership with a cutting-edge innovation incubator. My college roommate's firm. Actually, we wire the funds. They install everything, and our property values skyrocket. It's lean, it's fast, and it's exactly what this community deserves. The board members nodded like bobbleheads. Old Mr. Hargrove clapped once. The new couple from California looked starstruck. Elliot sat at the far end, pen hovering over the risk approval form the bylaws required for any expenditure over 50 grand. He'd already run the numbers. Furnick's website looked like it was built in 2008 by a kid on energy drinks. No verified employees listed in the state registry. No real references. Just buzzwords and stock photos of smiling families who definitely didn't live here. He cleared his throat, quiet but clear. Karen, before we move forward, the D&O liability policy requires written confirmation from the treasurer that this vendor is properly vetted and that our directors and officers coverage extends to the contract. I'll need that in writing from our insurance broker. Karen's smile didn't flicker. It sharpened. Elliot, sweetheart, we've been over this. You're always so thorough. But this is a handshake deal between friends. Furnick is valued at over $300 million. We're getting in on the ground floor. Don't be such a bureaucrat. Be a team player for once. The room shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. Elliot didn't raise his voice. He simply slid the unsigned form back across the polished table. I'm happy to be a team player. My job is to make sure the team doesn't get sued into oblivion when this ground floor turns out to be quicksand. I need the written confirmation. Clause 7C of the policy is very clear. Karen laughed. The kind of laugh that made the rest of the board relax, even as it made Elliot's stomach tighten. We'll sort it out later. Rachel from compliance can process the paperwork tonight. We're moving forward with the initial transfer Friday. The future waits for no one. Elliot. He walked out of that meeting with the same calm expression he wore when Karen had fined him $80 last summer for a borderline aggressive rosebush. But inside, the old familiar feeling settled in. The one that said someone was about to burn the house down and expect the insurance to rebuild it prettier. Back in his home office, Elliot opened a new folder on his laptop labeled simply Furnick. He started typing. Date. Time. Exact words Karen used. The fact that no risk assessment had been presented. The lack of any third-party vetting. He CC'd the entire board and the HOA attorney. Then he opened the physical binder he kept in the locked drawer, the one with printed emails, meeting minutes, and every single violation notice Karen had ever issued to anyone who dared disagree with her. He added a fresh sheet. Title: Furnick contract approval withheld pending DNO confirmation. By midnight, the first transfer request had already been emailed to finance. No signature from the treasurer. No insurance green light. Just Karen's cheerful note at the bottom. Approved by majority vote. Teamwork makes the dream work. Elliot saved everything. Twice. Once on the HOA drive. Once on a USB drive he labeled mismatch and tucked behind his tax returns. People in Willow Ridge thought the real drama was when someone painted their front door the wrong shade of gray. They had no idea the real war was just starting. And Karen Voss, with her perfect smile and her pearl necklace, had no clue that the quiet man at the end of the table had been keeping receipts for years. The next morning, the community Facebook group exploded with excitement. Smart security coming to Willow Ridge. Thank you, President Voss, for thinking of our safety. Karen reposted it with 17 heart emojis and a caption that read, Together we rise. Elliot read it while sipping coffee on his porch, watching the lawn service. Ironically, one of Karen's approved vendors trim his grass to the exact millimeter. He didn't comment. He just opened his Furnick folder and added another entry. It was the first of many. By the end of the month, the first $100,000 had already left the HOA reserve account. The Community Center Bulletin Board now featured glossy renderings of futuristic gates and cameras with little cartoon families waving happily. Karen held a Progress Update coffee hour where she handed out branded Furnick mugs like she was running for president of the United States instead of a suburban dictatorship. Elliot showed up, nodded politely, and took one mug just to be neighborly. Later, he used it to hold pens. He kept logging. Every email Karen sent praising the synergies. Every time the board voted to reclassify the expenditure as an operational necessity to bypass the treasurer's sign-off. Every discrepancy he found when he quietly pulled the raw data. Furnick's promised AI user adoption. Numbers claimed over 15,000 log security events in the first quarter. The actual server logs Elliot managed to access through the HOA IT guy, who owed him a favor, showed fewer than 200. The cameras weren't even online yet. He didn't yell at meetings. He didn't post passive-aggressive comments in the neighborhood app. He just kept the folder growing. When Karen cornered him in the parking lot after one meeting and whispered, Elliot, some people are starting to say you're holding the community back. You know how gossip works. He simply smiled and replied, I do. That's why I keep everything in writing. The gossip did start. Karen made sure of it. At the annual 4th of July block party, she floated the idea that certain board members were anti-progress and obsessed with paperwork instead of people. Neighbors who used to wave at Elliot now gave him side-eye when he walked his dog. Someone left a note in his mailbox. Stop being difficult. We all want the smart gates. Elliot photographed the note, dated it, and added it to the folder. Inside the Furnick file, the tabs multiplied. Tab 1, Original Proposal and his unanswered DNO request. Tab 2, Internal Metrics versus Furnick's Public Claims. Tab 3, Every time Karen had called him bureaucrat or not a team player in writing. Tab 4. Bank statements showing transfers routed through a Delaware shell company with no physical address. Summer dragged on. The grass stayed 2.5 inches. Karen issued 3 new violation notices to the single mom on Elm Street for excessive children's toys visible from street. Elliot paid her fine anonymously and added the receipt to a separate folder he labeled Karen's priorities. Then the first real red flag waved in public. The local news ran a small story. Furnick Community Ventures CFO indicted in multi-million fraud scheme. Elliot read it at 6:03 a.m. while the neighborhood was still asleep. By 6:45, the HOA group chat was blowing up with Karen's frantic damage control. Fake news. Our partnership is completely separate and rock solid. Elliot opened a fresh tab. He transcribed Karen's messages verbatim. He pulled the raw transaction logs. He cross-referenced the timing of the wire transfers with the indictment dates. The numbers didn't just whisper, they screamed. By August, the discrepancies had grown from suspicious to catastrophic. The HOA reserve account was bleeding. Vendors who were supposed to be paid through Furnick's integrated platform started calling Elliot directly because their checks bounced. Karen called an emergency board meeting and blamed supply chain issues and temporary cash flow hiccups. She wore her most confident blazer and promised the smart gates would be operational any day now. Elliot sat in his usual seat at the end of the table. He didn't speak until Karen directly addressed him. Elliot, as treasurer, perhaps you can reassure everyone that we're still on track. He looked up calmly. I can reassure everyone that I documented my refusal to approve this contract back in March because we never received the required DNO confirmation. I can also reassure everyone that I have every email, every memo, and every bank transfer saved in triplicate. The rest is above my pay grade. The room went dead silent except for the hum of the cheap fluorescent lights. Karen's smile froze like cheap Botox. For the first time in 6 years, someone had dared to say the quiet part out loud in front of witnesses. She recovered quickly. Of course. Well, we all appreciate Elliot's diligence. But the majority has spoken. We move forward as a community. Elliot simply nodded, closed his notebook, and walked out. Behind him, he heard the whispers start again. But this time they sounded a little less certain. This time, they sounded like people who were starting to wonder if the Emperor's new smart gates had no clothes. He went home, poured himself a single glass of whiskey, and opened the Furnick folder one more time. He added the date and the phrase he knew would matter most when the subpoenas finally arrived. Treasurer approval withheld. DNO exposure unverified. Karen Voss notified in writing. The storm was coming. And Elliot Hayes was the only one holding an umbrella made of paper trails. The headline hit the local paper like a lawnmower blade to the face. Furnick fraud investigation expands. Suburban HOA among affected entities. By breakfast, the entire neighborhood knew. Property values didn't drop overnight, but the group chat did. Karen tried to spin it with a mass email titled "Stay Calm and Carry On. Official update from your president." The email was 2 paragraphs of corporate speak and 1 selfie of her holding a Furnick mug like a trophy. Elliot read it while standing in his kitchen. Then he printed it, highlighted the lies in yellow, and added it to the growing binder that now required 2 rubber bands to stay closed. The first official call came from the HOA attorney at 9:17 a.m. Elliot, the board needs you in the community center at noon. Bring everything. He arrived 15 minutes early with 2 manila folders and a USB drive. Karen was already there, pacing in heels that clicked like countdown timers. Her usual board members sat like statues. The new outside counsel, a sharp woman in a gray suit, flipped through papers with the expression of someone who had just realized she'd inherited a dumpster fire. Elliot, Karen began before he even sat down, voice sweet enough to cause cavities. We understand you had some concerns about the Furnick project. Perhaps now would be a good time to share them, so we can all get on the same page. Elliot opened the first folder and slid the top page across the table. January 14th. Email requesting written D&O confirmation for the Furna contract. Never answered. January 17th. Treasurer memo withholding approval pending insurance coverage. Copy to entire board. February through June. 7 separate discrepancy reports showing fabricated metrics. All ignored. The outside counsel leaned forward. You're saying you never approved this expenditure? Not only did I never approve it, Elliot replied evenly, I documented the refusal in the official risk log, the financial drive, and an off-site backup. Clause 7C of our D&O policy is crystal clear. Large transactions require treasurer sign-off for coverage to apply. Karen's laugh came out brittle. This is ridiculous. We voted as a board. Everyone agreed. Elliot is just being difficult like always. The attorney didn't laugh. She pulled out a letter on insurance company letterhead and began reading aloud. Under Section 7C, coverage is excluded for any transaction not explicitly approved in writing by the treasurer or designated risk officer. In this instance, Mr. Elliot Hayes declined to approve the Furna contract. Therefore, Willow Ridge HOA's D&O policy does not extend to this matter. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Karen's face went the color of old grout. She gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles whitened. That can't be right. We were told we were covered. Finance said. You told me to stop being a bureaucrat, Elliot said quietly, meeting her eyes for the first time. I did exactly what the policy required. You chose to ignore it. For the first time in 6 years, Karen Voss had no comeback, no witty remark, no passive-aggressive neighborhood email draft ready on her phone. She just sat there blinking at the letter like it was written in a language she'd never bothered to learn. The outside counsel continued. Federal investigators will be here within the hour. They've requested to speak with the treasurer first. Mr. Hayes, are you willing to cooperate? Elliot nodded once. I have everything they'll need. Karen tried one last desperate swing. This is a witch hunt. Elliot has been undermining me since day one. He hates progress. Karen, the attorney cut in, voice flat. The only thing being hunted right now is the truth. And thanks to Mr. Hayes, the truth has excellent documentation. The meeting dissolved into stunned silence. Board members who had nodded along with Karen for years suddenly found reasons to check their phones or stare at the ceiling. Old Mr. Hargrove actually pushed his chair a few inches away from her. The power structure that had felt ironclad for half a decade was cracking louder than the HOA's cheap folding chairs. Elliot stood up, folders under his arm, and walked out without another word. Behind him, he heard Karen's voice rise an octave as she started making calls. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The satisfaction wasn't loud. It was the quiet click of a USB drive being handed to federal agents later that afternoon. It was the knowledge that every petty fine she'd ever issued, every rule she'd weaponized, every time she'd called him difficult, it all led to this single moment where the Queen of Willow Ridge finally realized her crown was made of papier-mâché and her kingdom ran on other people's signatures. The emergency session started at 6 a.m. because apparently panic doesn't keep normal business hours. The community center smelled like burnt coffee and fear. Karen sat at the head of the table in yesterday's blazer, makeup applied with the shaky hand of someone who'd spent the night refreshing news alerts. The board looked like they'd been through a war none of them had volunteered for. Harlan Roth, the longest-serving member, opened the meeting with the tone of a judge reading a death sentence. As of this morning, we are officially under investigation. The D&O denial letter is binding. We need a full timeline, and we need it now. Karen launched into her prepared speech about good faith and collective decisions, and how could anyone have known? Elliot waited until she ran out of oxygen, then opened his second folder, the thick one. January 14th, he began. Voice steady. Request for D&O verification. Ignored. January 17th. Formal withholding of approval. Copy to everyone. February 3rd. First metrics discrepancy report. March 8th. Second. April 19th. Escalation email. May 7th. Follow-up. June 2nd. Final refusal to validate vendor claims. Every single document was delivered. Read receipt confirmed. And saved. He laid the pages out like a poker hand nobody wanted to see. The room absorbed them one by one. Karen's hands trembled so badly she spilled her coffee. Harlan looked at her directly. Karen, your signature appears on every quarterly report that should have flagged these issues. You had access to every memo. You chose to proceed anyway. She tried a victim card one last time. I was told everything was handled. Elliot never made the severity clear. I made it clear in writing 7 separate times, Elliot interrupted. Calm as ever. You told me to stop being difficult. You told the entire board I was holding us back. Now the insurance company is telling you exactly how expensive that decision was. The outside counsel slid the official denial letter across the table again. Karen stared at it like it might bite her. Her pearl necklace suddenly looked less like jewelry and more like a noose. By 7:30, the board had voted. Immediate removal of Karen Voss as president pending full investigation. Access to all HOA systems revoked. Her executive email account frozen. The same woman who had spent 6 years deciding whether your Christmas lights were tasteful enough now couldn't even log into the group chat. Elliot didn't gloat. He simply handed over the USB drive containing every file, every email, every bank transfer. Federal agents are waiting in the conference room next door. I'll cooperate fully. Karen stood up on legs that no longer seemed steady. For a moment, she looked at Elliot with something that might have been hatred, or maybe, just maybe, regret. Then she walked out without a word. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than any gavel. The board members exhaled collectively. One of them actually muttered, Jesus, we almost lost everything because of smart gates that never existed. Elliot stayed long enough to answer questions, then drove home through the same streets where Karen had once ruled with an iron measuring tape. Neighbors were already outside whispering. Someone had taken down the Furnick progress posters from a bulletin board. The future Karen had promised was already being quietly erased. He parked in his driveway, walked inside, and for the first time in months, allowed himself one small, private smile. Not triumphant, just satisfied. The kind of satisfaction that comes when the person who spent years calling you difficult finally learns that sometimes difficult is the only thing standing between a community and total disaster. 2 days later, the official memo appeared on the HOA website and every resident's email. Policy 7C reactivated and expanded. All discretionary expenditures over $10,000 now require written treasurer approval before any funds move. Noncompliance voids D&O coverage. Effective immediately. No credit to Elliot. No public apology. But everyone knew. The footer carried his quiet fingerprints. The same clause Karen had laughed at now, carved into the bylaws like a warning label on a power tool. New compliance workshops were scheduled. Residents who once rolled their eyes at paperwork now treated Clause 7C like gospel. Karen's name was quietly removed from every plaque and directory. Her parking spot in the community center was reassigned to the new president, a mild-mannered retired teacher who actually read emails before hitting send. Elliot stayed through the transition exactly as promised. He helped federal investigators sort the mess. He sat in a beige-walled deposition room while Karen's former college roommate, Furnick's former CFO, sweated under oath. He watched the projector display the same denial letter that had ended Karen's reign. He answered every question with the same calm precision that had saved the HOA from bankruptcy. When it was over, he walked out into the afternoon light. Phone buzzing with a message from the new board. Retention bonus. Title upgrade. Advisory role on risk reform. He read it once, turned off the screen, and slid the phone into his pocket. What he wanted had never been a promotion. It was the quiet knowledge that the rules, those ridiculous, petty, sometimes life-ruining HOA rules, could finally protect the community instead of being weaponized by one person's ego. The neighborhood returned to its postcard surface. Lawns stayed at 2 inches. Flags stayed regulation height. But something fundamental had shifted. When the next person tried to push a visionary deal without proper checks, the first question in the room would be, does Elliot need to see this? He never became the loud hero. He didn't give interviews or post victory laps in the group chat. He simply went back to his spreadsheets, his dog walks, and his perfectly compliant rose bushes. But every once in a while, when he passed the community center and saw the new security cameras, real ones, properly vetted, he allowed himself a small internal laugh. The kind you feel when the neighborhood dictator who called you difficult finally learns that the most dangerous person in any community isn't the one who breaks the rules. It's the quiet one who documents them. And in Willow Ridge, the receipts had finally come due.